I want you to try something for me right now, wherever you are, unless you're driving, maybe keep your eyes on the road, but try to visualize your mind. If you had to, draw a diagram of how your brain works, what does that look like?
That's a dangerous question to ask before I've had my coffee.
Bear with me.
Mm.
I mean, most of us, if we're being honest, probably picture a machine, like
Yeah.
a really nice computer. You've got your hard drive over here for memory, a processor for logic.
The graphics card for imagination, maybe.
Right. Or, my personal favorite, the Swiss Army knife model.
The Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, you pull out the anger blade when you get cut off in traffic. Then you fold that away and pull out the math blade to split the check at dinner. Distinct tools for distinct jobs.
Right, right. We think in compartments. Modular parts that work together, but they're separate.
Exactly. But here's the question for today's deep dive. What if that model is completely fundamentally wrong? What if your mind isn't a bag of parts at all? What if, and stick with me, you physically cannot have a thought without also having an emotion, a will, and a memory all at once, as one single indivisible thing?
You are jumping right into the deep end today.
That is the name of the show. Today we're exploring a really fascinating and honestly a kind of mind-bending philosophical treatise by Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily. It's called Wahdat, al-Wujud, al-Aqliyya.
Which translates to the mental unity of existence.
It's a heavy title, I know, but the core idea is incredibly grounding. The author just challenges the way we've looked at psychology and philosophy for centuries. His whole thesis is that the mind isn't a collection of faculties or tools.
No, it's a singular unit.
A singular unit of existence.
It's a huge shift. We're so used to breaking things down to understand them, analysis by division. Al-Waily argues that the moment you divide the mind, you stop understanding it.
You kill the subject to study it.
Exactly.
And the implications they're wild. We're talking about redefining evolution, understanding gut feelings, and arguing that a tiny little amoeba is actually a philosopher.
It sounds like hyperbole, I know, but the logic holds up surprisingly well. It all starts with what the author calls the House of Cards argument.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The text identifies 5 main players, or faculties of the mind. Walk us through the lineup before we smash them all together.
Sure. So according to the text, we have 5 main capabilities. First, there's will, or al-irada. That's your ability to choose to desire something.
The driver of the car.
Exactly. Then second is deduction or inference, al-istintaj, the logic engine. Third is memory, al-hafisa. Fourth is perception, al-idrak, just sensing things. And finally, number 5, imagination, at-takayul.
Okay, that's a pretty standard lineup. Will, deduction, memory, perception, imagination. In my Swiss Army knife model, these are 5 different blades. I can use the will blade to decide to go for a run, even if my perception blade tells me it's raining.
And that is exactly where the author would stop you. He says they're not blades, they're more like dimensions of a single object, like the height, width, and depth of a cube.
You can't just remove the width and still have a cube.
You can't. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And he uses this chain reaction argument to prove it.
Yeah, I found this part really interesting, but I have to admit, at first, I was a little skeptical. It felt a bit like, semantic gymnastics.
It can feel that way.
Yeah.
But let's test the logic. Let's say you want to exercise your will. You want to choose to drink coffee instead of tea.
Okay.
To make that choice. To exercise will, what actually has to happen in your head?
Well, I want it.
But why do you want it?
Yeah.
To prefer coffee over tea, you have to compare them. Coffee gives me a buzz. Tea makes me sleepy. That whole comparison process. That's deduction.
Okay, fair point. I'm weighing the options, so will needs deduction.
But hang on. To compare coffee and tea, you have to hold the concept of coffee and the concept of tea in your mind at the same time.
Right.
You can't compare them if you've forgotten what one of them is. That requires memory.
So, no deduction without memory.
Correct. And finally, how did those concepts even get into your memory in the first place?
I had to drink them. Smell the beans. That's perception.
Exactly. So the whole thing just collapses backward. You take away perception, you have no memory. No memory. You can't deduce. Can't deduce, you can't prefer. Can't prefer, you have no will.
Okay, I'm following the chain. But what about the other way? Can I have perception without will? Can I just, sit there and stare at a wall, totally passive?
Al-Waily would say no. He argues that the very act of focusing your eyes, or even just listening to a sound, implies a will to perceive it.
So even ignoring something is an act of will?
It is. The mind is always on in all 5 dimensions at once.
So it's an all or nothing deal. You don't have a memory part of your brain and a will part of your brain. You just have a mind.
A mind. And it's always doing all of these things simultaneously. Precisely. And this is where the text picks a fight with some pretty big names in Western philosophy.
Right, specifically David Hume.
Yes, Hume is the big boss battle here.
For listeners who maybe didn't spend their college years in a beret smoking clove cigarettes, remind us what Hume's whole deal was.
David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, a famous skeptic, and he argued there's no such thing as a self. He said if you look inside your own mind, you don't find a manager. You just see a bundle of perceptions.
Just hot, cold, sad, happy, red, blue, all just flashing by.
Exactly. He called it the bundle theory. It's just a stream of data with no one actually watching the screen.
And Al-Waily says?
Al-Waily says, objection.
On what grounds?
On the grounds of will. Al-Waily argues that the very fact that you can accept an idea or reject an idea, that you can say, I refuse to believe that, proves there is a unified self managing those perceptions. If we were just a bundle of inputs, we'd react to everything automatically. We'd be slaves to whatever data came in.
So the ability to pause, the ability to just say no.
That veto power. Exactly. It proves that there's a unity holding the cards, not just a shuffle of cards flying through the air.
That brings us to what I think is maybe the most surprising and definitely the most controversial part of this deep dive. If the mind is this all-or-nothing unity, what does that mean for things that aren't human?
We're going down the biological end.
All the way down. The text talks about the amoeba, a single-celled organism. No brain, no nervous system. It's just a microscopic blob of protoplasm.
And yet, Al-Waily argues it has the same fundamental mental structure as you or me.
See, this is where I get stuck. Biologists have words for this. Chemotaxis. It's a chemical reaction. You poke it, it moves. It's not sitting there thinking, oh, excuse me.
That's the mechanistic view, right? We see a small thing, so we assume it's a simple machine. But the source material really challenges that. Al-Waily asks, when that amoeba moves toward food, what is actually happening?
I'm hungry.
Well, hunger is a desire. That's will. To have that desire, it must have perceived the food. And crucially, it must have deduced even the most basic, primitive way that this substance is good for me and that acid over there is bad.
So he's saying you can't have the action without the mental machinery behind it.
Not at all. He says if you strip away the will, the memory, or the deduction, the amoeba would just be a rock. It wouldn't move. The fact that it acts for its own survival proves it possesses this mental unity.
So it might be a very dim light compared to a human mind, but the light is on.
The light is on. And this leads to a massive pivot in how the text views evolution. And I want to be clear to our listeners, the author takes a very specific and, let's say, vintage stance here.
Yeah.
He sides with Lamarck over Darwin.
Right.
He does. And this is a crucial distinction. Darwin is natural selection, random mutations happen, and the ones that help you survive get passed on. It's blind luck filtered by death.
But
Lamarck believed in evolution by effort. The classic example everyone uses is the giraffe. Lamarck thought giraffes have long necks because their ancestors stretched and stretched to reach high leaves, and that effort was somehow passed down.
Which, just to be the science police for a second, we now know isn't how DNA works. If I get huge muscles at the gym, my baby isn't born with a six-pack.
Biologically, you are correct. But Al-Waily is making a philosophical point about the source of that change. He's arguing that early organisms didn't just survive by accident. They survived because they used their will and their intellect to adapt.
He refuses to believe complex behavior is just random.
He refuses. He gives the example of the solitary wasp or certain spiders. We see a wasp building an incredibly complex species-specific nest, and we say, it's instinct. It's a robot program.
But Al-Waily asks, where did the program come from?
And his answer is that some great-great-great-grand wasp actually figured it out.
Yes. He argues that an ancient ancestor faced a problem, used its will and deduction to invent the nest, and did it with conscious focus. So the very first wasp was an architect.
A genius.
A genius. And because it did this over and over, that conscious intellectual effort became a habit. And then over eons of heredity, that habit became petrified into what we now call instinct.
Petrified intelligence. I love that phrase in the text. It paints such a clear picture. Instinct isn't mindless. It's just ancient reasoning that's been put on autopilot. It creates this beautiful continuity between us and the animal kingdom. The text mentions a bird studied at the Sorbonne, the bec en sabot, that builds this incredibly watertight, complex nest. The author argues you just can't explain that complexity through random accidents.
It requires the 5 faculties.
At the very beginning of that process, yes.
Yeah.
It requires assuming the presence of will, deduction, and perception in that first genius ancestor.
So the modern bird is just following the blueprints.
The ancestor was the architect. The descendant is the bricklayer. The bricklayer doesn't need to know the physics because the architect already did the math.
It really changes how you look at nature. Instead of seeing biological machines, you're seeing a world full of frozen geniuses just repeating the smart decisions their ancestors made.
It attributes a lot more dignity to life, doesn't it? It suggests that the driving force of existence isn't random chance, but will. The will to exist, the will to survive.
Speaking of frozen things, let's move to the part of the text that I think listeners will find the most relatable, the relationship between logic and emotion.
Ah, yes. This is the section that really helps explain the human condition.
Yeah, because usually we're told these are enemies. Don't get emotional, be logical. It's Spock versus Kirk, reason versus passion.
Right. But under the mental unity theory, that binary is completely false. The text argues there is no difference in substance between an idea and an emotion.
They're made of the same mental matter.
The exact same stuff.
How can that be? Fear feels very different from a math equation. One makes my palms sweat, the other just makes me bored.
Think about the water and ice analogy the author uses. Water and ice are chemically the same thing, H2O, but their state is different. The author argues that an emotion is simply an idea that has been submerged into the subconscious.
Okay, walk me through the origin story of an emotion then. How does an idea become a feeling?
Let's use the fear of fire. Today, if you see a fire spreading in your kitchen, you feel fear instantly. It's panic. You don't stand there and stroke your chin, right?
Definitely not.
But the author argues that originally, for your distant ancestors, this was a strictly intellectual process. They saw fire. They perceived it burning a tree. They used deduction. Fire causes destruction. Destruction is bad for survival. Therefore, I should avoid fire.
It started as a logical equation, a safety briefing.
Exactly. And because it was so important, that logical conclusion was repeated millions of times. It sank deeper and deeper into the hereditary memory. It became compressed. So now you don't have to do the math. You just feel the fear.
The idea became an emotion.
So emotions are basically zip files of logic.
That is a fantastic way to put it, yes. They are intellectual movements that happen so fast we don't consciously see the steps anymore. Which explains why he says you can't have an emotion without an intellectual root.
Correct. You cannot fear something unless you know, or at least believe, that it's dangerous. You can't love something unless you perceive it as good. There's always a hidden thought inside every emotion.
But the text also flips it. It says you can't have a thought without an emotion. That one seems harder to grasp. I can do math without crying.
You can, but why are you doing the math in the first place?
Someone is paying me.
Then you have a desire for money. That's a form of will, an emotional drive. Or maybe you're solving a puzzle for fun. That's the desire to know. Even the driest scientist is driven by the passion for truth. The mind is a unity. You can't separate the drive from the action.
There's a really interesting dynamic the text describes about mental energy here. It talks about how the mind handles this matter depending on if we're tired or active.
Yes. The author suggests that when the mind is active, strong, and in control, it processes this mental stuff as ideas.
Yeah.
It keeps things in the realm of logic. But when the mind is passive or weak or overwhelmed.
That same stuff transforms into emotion.
Exactly. So getting emotional is basically the mind shifting gears because it can't handle the raw data as logic anymore.
Or that the habit has just taken over. Think about when you're exhausted at the end of a long week. You're much more likely to snap at your partner, right?
100%. That's because your active will and deduction are fatigued. You can't process the situation logically anymore. They didn't mean to annoy me. So the mental matter just manifests as the raw emotion of anger. It's a loss of active control.
And that connects back to the evolution point. Animals operate mostly on instinct and emotion, which is just petrified logic because they lack the new active deduction power that humans have.
But, and this is key, and where the author really defends the dignity of animals, he refuses to call them machines. He brings up Descartes, the French philosopher, who famously said, animals are just clockwork automatons.
Right. If you kick a dog and it yelps, Descartes said that's just a spring uncoiling.
Which is a horrifying thought.
It is.
And al-Waily hates that idea. He keeps coming back to this. If an animal moves, it has a will. And if it has a will, it is a mental entity, not a mechanical one.
He uses the example of bird migration to prove it.
Right. A bird flies thousands of miles. A materialist says, oh, it's magnetic fields, it's hormones, it's all mechanics. Al-Waily asks, but why? What pushes the start button on the machine?
The engine versus the driver?
Exactly. He argues the physical body is just the car. The will is the driver. You can explain how an internal combustion engine works all day long, but it doesn't explain why the car is driving to the grocery store.
The intent comes before the mechanism.
Yes. The text says the will precedes the body. The need to eat created the mouth. The need to see created the eye. The physical form is a result of the mental desire, not the other way around.
It's a complete inversion of how we usually hear this explained. Usually it's brain chemicals fire, therefore I feel sad. He's saying, you feel sad, therefore brain chemicals fire.
It empowers consciousness. It puts the self back in the driver's seat. It says you are not just a byproduct of atoms bumping into each other. You are a unified force.
So let's bring this all back together. We started with the Swiss Army knife, and we've ended up with what? A monolith.
A monolith is a good word. A unified block. Wahdat al-Wujud, al-Aqliyya leaves us with a view of the human and the animal as a totally integrated entity.
Okay, so if we had to give the listener the main takeaways, how would you break it down?
I'd say three things. First, unity. Your will, memory, logic, and perception are one thing. You can't use one without the others. Stop trying to compartmentalize yourself.
Excellent.
History. Your instincts are just the brilliant, hard-won logic of your ancestors, saved to your biological hard drive. You are walking around with millions of years of petrified intelligence.
And finally,
Continuity. Your emotions are just thoughts that have become automatic. They aren't irrational. They're hyper-rationality that's been compressed for speed.
it really makes you look at your own gut feelings differently, doesn't it? It's not magic, it's just really, really fast historical data processing.
Exactly. When you have a bad feeling about a dark alley, this isn't some irrational fear. That is the accumulated deduction of thousands of generations of humans realizing that dark alleys can contain predators. It's knowledge.
It's just compressed knowledge.
Yeah.
And it forces us to respect the will. We aren't just drifting through life. Every action we take is proof of our existence as thinking entities, which leads to a rather heavy responsibility.
Yeah, so
Well, if the author is right, and our habits today eventually become the instincts of our descendants,
oh, yes. I see where you're going with this.
then what we choose to do, what we focus our will and our deduction on right now, it matters a lot. We're not just living for ourselves, we're building the mental architecture for the future.
That is a lot of pressure, actually.
But it's also hopeful. It means we aren't victims of our biology. We are the architects of it.
It creates a sense of legacy. Your struggle to learn something new, your effort to control your temper, your push to solve a problem, according to Al-Waily, that effort isn't lost. It's being written into the code.
I want to leave our listener with a final thought on that. If Al-Waily is right and our instincts are just crystallized will from the past, take a hard look at your own life. What habits are you forming right now? What are you doing every single day without thinking about it? Because according to this theory, you aren't just shaping your day. You might just be writing the source code for humanity 1,000 years from now.
A terrifying and wonderful thought.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.